everyone doing? Welcome to the stream. Today we're going to be talking about lessons 23 and 24, running a top cut, large event structure, and if we have time, if folks are interested, we have the Legends of the Force rules update, and we can go over the changes in that document. But just going to hang out for a minute as folks continue to trickle in before we get started. I'm hoping to add a... Where is it? Where am I pointing? I don't know where I'm pointing. We're going to hopefully add a little bit more back there. But that's going to take some measuring and putting stuff in its place. Yeah, we'll get started in just a moment. As always, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer them or not answer them, as the case may be. Yeah, should be a good time. Alrighty. Now that we've been hanging out for a minute and folks have had the opportunity to show up, I'm also expecting a slightly smaller crowd given that it is the evening of the 4th of July, and so a lot of people, while they have the day off, also have plans. So there may be fewer questions. I'm going to get used to that. But we're going to just churn on through things. Hi, Kevin Blaze. How we doing? Alrighty. So let's start with running a top cut. I'm going to be talking mostly about running a top 8 as opposed to a top 16 or a top 32. But the general principles of how to manage the single elimination portion of a larger tournament remain the same. For your planetary qualifiers, sector qualifiers, regional qualifiers, those are all going to be top 8s per policy. But top 8s are weird. I love top 8s, but top 8s are weird. They are simultaneously the most stressful and most relaxed part of a tournament. For players, they've met their goals, right? Like most players, they just want to do as best they can. Locking top 8, they're just like, cool, I have done what I came here to do. I am happy. And at that point, like most of the players in the top 8 know each other at least peripherally because they have been playing at the top tables all day or for 2 days, and so they're familiar with the people around them, have probably played against most of them. Like your undefeated player, if you have one, will have played against probably 2 other people in your top 8. And so everybody already knows each other. Everybody is just a little bit more relaxed because there's a little bit more close-knit to that. For judging, you're down to 8 players from potentially as many as 100. You don't get a much better judge-to-player ratio than 1 to 8. Or by the time you get to the finals, you might have 2 judges on 1 match. And so the difficulty of your task has decreased dramatically. Players have met their primary goals, but also more is on the line, and so there can be more stress for everyone. Jerry Shengo asks, is PQ always top 8 now? There's a top 4 for Hawaii PQ for Twilight of the Republic. I believe under 32 players policy states that it's a cut to top 4. Having spoken with FFG, that remains true for now. There's a possibility that gets adjusted because I think at something like 21 or 22 players, if I'm remembering my tournament math correctly, it is possible that a player who is X and 1 misses that top cut. And that is a suboptimal experience. So there is a chance that changes down the line. However, that is not the case for now. So yeah, you might have a top 4 for your PQ. with prizes going to 5th through 8th automatically. But let's talk about presenting top 8. So before the top 8 begins, you have to know who's in it. Depending on the size of your event, you can figure out how you want to share this information. Some tournament organizers, some judges just hit publish on Melee and then say, hey, if you made top 8, please report to top 8 play area. And that's it. For larger events, especially when there's a crowd, something like sectors, regionals, galactics, you almost certainly want to announce those players. For planetary qualifiers, I generally like to announce the names, particularly if there's still a crowd left. If for some reason there's a delay between the end of the final round and announcing the top 8, or if like most of the player crowd has already left and so you're announcing to an empty room, that's a little bit less exciting. If you are announcing, don't publish the standings just to keep a little bit of mystery and work from first place down. If you start in 8th place, the most interesting result is known immediately. Like, the player who is undefeated, that player knows that they've made top 8. The players who are X1, they know that they've made top 8. Starting with them and celebrating them, being like, this person's in first, undefeated, this person's in second, this person's in third, fourth, fifth, is very, particularly for larger events, can feel great. Having your name announced so you can be celebrated by everybody who played is, I think, a very important moment for players. It allows your friends to jump on your back and cheer you on. I generally say in first place, name, and if they're undefeated, include undefeated. I might include match points, just so that when we get down to the last bracket, I can say something along the lines of 6th through 9th place all have 22 match points. And this tells people, hey, somebody's not going to make it. And then I announce 6th place, 7th place, 8th place. Maybe I include the breaker in case tiebreakers come into play. Like if it's a very small amount, like if it's under a percentage point, I love to announce, and by 0.05 opponent match win percentage, or in the very rare case, game win percentage. It builds some tension, and for the player who got in, feels better. For the player who didn't get in, it does feel worse, and so there is a trade-off there. But once you've announced those players, make sure that standings are publicly available, and then give players a minute or two to be like, hey, there's a problem with my standings. You need to lock them in and be like, these are final, you're not allowed to change them anymore at a certain point, because you need to start distributing prizes, start playing the top 8. However, sometimes a player will misreport a match result during the course of a tournament and not realize it until final standings. They go to check and they're like, wait a second, I know that I'm X3, why does it say that I'm X4? And they bring that up and we adjust it. And at that point, your top 8 is finalized. I usually give 3 minutes. 2 minutes is tight but reasonable. 5 is a long time, but for a larger event is not unreasonable. Once you've gotten your top 8 announced, there's a bunch of stuff that you need to do maybe. It depends on if you have coverage and what sort of coverage you have, what sort of media the tournament organizer or store wants to do. For larger events, you're going to get probably a photo of all top 8 competitors, pictures of individual top 8 competitors. There's a chance that they are required to fill out tax forms or a short biography, like so that you can pass that off to commentators. But generally, particularly for planetary qualifiers, you can just get them seated and get them into playing those rounds as quickly as possible. Mad Dog Max says, have you thought about cutting top up to top 16 for people matching that 8th place record. So the way, as Gentle Giant says, the way it worked at the beginning of the game's lifespan is everybody who had the same record as 8th place, up from as long as they were above 16th place, played one additional round, paired against somebody who's already locked in the top 8, which it allows some people, it allows people who came in 9th place and had the same record as 8th place to participate in this top cut. However, the top cut math was sometimes a little janky. At certain tournament sizes, you would have players who had the same record as 8th place in 17th place, and so you'd still have players missing on breakers, which felt bad. If you have this entire system to allow people who are missing on breakers to have the opportunity to play in the top cut, playing an additional round ideally help them. Plus, if it was small, if it was just 9th place, for example, 9th place and 8th place would play a round, and the rest of your top 8 just sit in a round for an hour doing nothing. If it went deeper, though, let's say it went all the way to 16th place, 1st place, who could be an undefeated player, now is playing somebody who's like X2-1 in a single elimination match to be able to participate in the top 8, and that's another feels bad. I think that the costs outweighed the benefits for uneven cuts. I know that some people would like to have larger top cuts cutting to top 16 or even top 64. I'm used to top 8 because that's what the TCGs that I have played and judged generally cut to. And really what it does is if you expand the single elimination portion of the event, you often at the same time reduce the number of Swiss rounds, which means that actually fewer people get to play more games. So for example, if you have a 2,000 player event like Galactics is going to be, that event could theoretically be a top 16 or even a top 32 single elimination portion. But that would mean that, if we did top 32 for Galactics, it would essentially mean you play one round of Swiss on Sunday and then you go immediately into single elimination, as opposed to playing 3 rounds of Swiss on Sunday and then going into single elimination. And so 32 players play 2 fewer rounds, 16 players play 1 fewer round. I lean towards more people playing more games. It also makes it so that when the prize structure goes past the top cut, which is pretty frequent for these larger events, players feel like they're playing for something for longer. Whereas, if you go into day 2 or day 3 of Galactics, and you're like, well, I'm top 64, but there's actually no way I can make top 32, or I have to win against somebody who is doing well. As opposed to, I have 3 rounds, and if I can win all 3, there's a chance that I can do really well and get potentially up into the top 16, as opposed to my prizes are already locked in. So, also, top cuts have more production when you're talking about, for example, coverage, which means that expanding that potentially extends the duration of the tournament. There are a lot of reasons why it doesn't appeal to me, but that's not a decision that I'm making. It's a decision that FFG makes. But they have moved away from asymmetrical cuts or uneven cuts to just cutting to top 8. So you cut to top 8, you did the media, you brought them over to the player area. Something that you can do are courtesy checks for decks. There are a couple of ways to handle courtesy checks. The important thing to keep in mind is that this is the goal of this is to strictly improve the player experience. So if we find marked cards or a deck problem and we don't believe it's cheating, so like if a player's like, oh yeah, all of my Avengers are marked, and you're like, huh, how did that happen? They're like, well, I win more games when I know when I'm going to draw an Avenger. You're like, okay, you can disqualify somebody if they are cheating in these courtesy checks. However, if they are not cheating, don't issue a penalty for deck problems or marked cards, because we're not currently in a match, and so their deck isn't illegal, their deck isn't marked in a match, and it leads to a better play experience. If there is a deck list problem, that's still something that needs to be addressed and has been demonstrably incorrect for the duration of the tournament. And so that still receives a game loss. But you take the deck, you perform a check, it looks good. These can be relatively fast checks. If you're running like a planetary qualifier and you're on your own, or it's 1 or 2 judges, as opposed to like a sector qualifier where I can be like, hey, I have 8 floor judges who are no longer doing things. Each of you take a deck, do a full deck check. You can do a quick look at the main deck for sleeves and be like, your main deck looks good on sleeves. I spent 10 seconds looking at it, that's fine. Now let me look at the sideboard, and if the sideboard cards are correct, the main deck is most likely correct, because again, the most frequent error with deck problems is failure to de-sideboard. And so if you want to have an abbreviated deck check for these courtesy checks, look at the sleeves or the cards for marked cards, give that to the player and say, you can start shuffling and playing. While you're playing, I'll look at your sideboard and see if there are any issues. This allows them to shuffle, draw opening hands, and just speeds the process along a little bit. Part of the reason we can be a little bit more forgiving here is that pretty much every match is going to have a judge on it. If you've had coverage, you're going to have open deck lists, and cheating with your deck construction when your opponent is allowed to read your deck list is very risky. Not only are you unlikely to gain an advantage from it, but you are very likely to be called out and investigated for it. And so there is a lot of disincentive to that sort of behavior, which allows us to be a little bit more casual and relaxed. And again, you want to take top cuts seriously. It's important for players because it is the highlight of their weekend. However, being too strict about things makes the players feel more tense. If you're allowed to relax, if you allow banter, if you allow crosstalk and table talk, pushing the boundaries of what you would allow during the Swiss rounds, that's okay. It lets players just feel a little bit more at home. It is a more intimate setting because it's just 8 players and 2 or 3 judges, and it can feel a lot like most of the top 8s I have judged for any game over the many, many years have felt more like weekly play at my LGS than the Swiss portion of the event. Just because people are like happy to be there, they're having fun, they're already like they have hit value for the weekend, and so every win from here on out is just extra value. Some people, of course, are playing for invites or for the trophy, for fame and glory, but it's a slightly different environment than the rest of the event. Once everything's set up, though, it's time to play some Unlimited. Your scorekeeping software will generally just pair the rounds for you. I like having paper brackets because I'm old and my hair's going gray. It just makes it, having the paper bracket lets me see quarterfinals, semifinals, finals. I know who's playing who. I know the entire thing. I can write it down and then add it to the software later. Gentle Giant says, 33 says, it's true, it's wild even at events with huge prizes. Yeah, I've seen events with hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line, like $250,000 in prizes, and the players are more relaxed and joking more, even if they haven't split, even if they are playing for the prizes. Some of the most relaxed games I've ever seen are two people playing for, like, one of them gets 100,000, the other gets 50,000 or something like that, and they're just so relaxed because both of them, they're making a year's salary in a day. And so they're just like, look, everything is great. I'm just happy. I'm having fun. I'm about to get run over because my deck sucks against that one. Let's play some game. It's great to see. I really like that there's a lot of sporting behavior at these sorts of things. But, alrighty, for your bracket, the way it works is you want your highest seed playing against your the lowest possible seed. So 1 plays 8, 2 plays 7, 3 plays 6, 4 plays 5. And you want it so that first and second place only play in the finals. So that means they're on opposite halves of the bracket. And essentially you want to keep 2 and 3 as far away from the first seed as possible. So the top half of the bracket is 1-8, 4-5, 2-7, 3-6. If you're running a draft, however, players should be seeded randomly for the draft and then paired as they would be for the draft, not by seed. So, seats, not seeds. God, that is hard for me to enunciate clearly. But seats 1 and 5, 2, 6, 3, 7, 4, 8 play for the round, and then the appropriate winners, and again, scorekeeping software will take care of that. However, in both of them, the player with the higher seed, the higher ranking in the Swiss portion, chooses who starts with initiative for game 1 of each match, or at least they will as of the policy update that comes out in 1 week for today. Which means that it's possible that in a draft, rank 1 and rank 2 will play each other in the first round of a draft top 8, and rank 1 gets the choice of play or draw, or starting with initiative or not. Mr. Donovan says, and that's a new change. Yes, it is a new change. It is an incentive to help encourage players from scooping into top 8. I'm not sure what the difference in win rate is when you start with it, or have choice versus don't have choice of starting with initiative, because also some decks don't want to start with initiative. I know that it is not as substantial as it is in some other games. I know that last I heard, which was at this point like a year and a half ago, so the meta has changed dramatically, but for a while the Lorcana meta was hugely dependent on going first. Whoever went first had a ludicrous win rate and almost always would win a best of 3 match. Other games, it's a lot tighter, where it's like 51 or 52%. But those couple of percentage points can mean that you just do that much better in the top 8. Particularly, like, some decks are rewarded for starting with initiative more than others. Aggro decks generally want to go first and have more of an advantage there, and so you have this built-in incentive to continue to play all of your matches through the end of Swiss. Now, some people are like, well, if I draw, both of us are locked, and if we play, one of us makes it, the other one doesn't, those players are likely to draw in. However, 2 players who are like, we're both locked, but we could play for seed, that seems a little bit more plausible here, especially if somebody's like, look, my odds go way up if I win this match, and I have a good matchup here, so I'm going to take it, I'm going to go for the win, so that I can also crush through top 8. Official top cuts have a time limit of 75 minutes. If players do not finish their match in time, they go to essentially sudden death. So the way it works is, if we're playing game 2 and I have won game 1, I win the match. If we have completed games 1 and 2 and have not yet started game 3, the player who would start with the initiative for game 3 wins the match. If we are in game 3, or technically if we're in game 1, the player with the most remaining HP on their base wins. And this is after the end of round procedure, where we finish the current round and play one additional action phase. For unofficial events, you can consider running your top cuts without a time limit. If you do so, consult with the tournament organizer to see if there are any limitations on time that you can spend in the venue. I've learned from experience that a lot of venues in Europe, particularly those outside of game stores, close, for me, what feels like relatively early, potentially as early as 8 p.m. And so you may need to have some sort of time limits. A lot of the large American convention centers are entirely fine with you being there until midnight. However, if you're there at 12:01 a.m. On Monday morning, they're like, hey, you were here Monday morning, we're going to charge you for the entire day. Some will only charge you for the hour, but that's still very expensive. And so a TO might just be like, hey, make sure the players are out of here before midnight. Like 11:50 is the latest a match can be playing. I need a result at 11:50, so call time at 11:45, no matter what time that is. Or call time at 7:45, no matter what time that is, even if we're in the final match. Sometimes folks relocate to, as Loku says, McDonald's or Denny's, a 24-hour diner, a restaurant, a cafe, the lobby of the convention center, the hotel. Try to avoid that. Try to avoid relocating to a secondary location for your top 8. It takes away some of the glitz and glamour. Although I've also been in convention centers where they're like tearing down the convention center as we are playing the finals, and it's just tables slamming against tables. It's the loudest thing in the world. And two people are like, we are trying our hardest to concentrate, and we are playing for a huge amount of value here and cannot concentrate at all. And you get to the point where like the convention hall crew is standing around your table watching, because the only thing that they have to do before they're allowed to go home is pick up the 2 chairs that the players are sitting in and the table that they're playing at. Alrighty. Another note for Top Cut is that as players finish their matches, you might finish one side of the bracket first. You can have people start playing their semifinals before quarterfinals for the other side of the bracket have finished. This can sometimes be time efficient. Other times, like the aggro player just beats one person, they beat the second mid-range player, and then they're like, okay, cool. The mid-range mirror from quarterfinals is still going on, and they're playing game 1 still. I'm going to go twiddle my thumbs for 2 hours, come back and see if I'm needed then. With larger gaps, you run the risk of the player wanting to leave more for food or to take a break. And if a player leaves, you run more risk of losing the player altogether. So if a player is leaving, make sure that you have some way to contact them. Either have one of their friends hang out, or just be like, hey, if we need you, what's a number that we can contact you at, or who are you going to be with so we can contact you, or just be like, don't leave the hall so we can page you over the voice system. Just make sure you don't lose your players. Then, after players get eliminated, prize them out. It's relatively straightforward to hand stuff out. I usually wait until a player is eliminated to give them their stuff. But as soon as they are eliminated, I give them their stuff. I don't make the entire top 8 play out, because if you're in 5th through 8th, you're getting the same things. Gentle Giant says, don't let players go for a quick dinner. You will only make that mistake once. Absolutely. A lot of players will also be like, hey, can I use the restroom real quick before we get started with the top 8? And be like, I mean, you're not going to tell a player, no, you can't use the restroom. However, give them a time limit. They're like, hey, can I have a couple minutes to relax after the Swiss? Can I go take a smoke break? Whatever it is. Just be like, you can go. However, we're going to be starting our top 8 at a certain time. Let's say 5:40. If you are not here by 5:45, you will receive a game loss for tardiness. if you're not here by 5:50, you will receive a match loss and be dropped from the event. You can apply tardiness to your top 8. Just communicate that to your players. Also, something that if you're not running a timed top 8, if it is untimed, stalling ceases to be a thing people can do. However, slow play still is a thing. And so people are more likely to slow play in top 8 just because they're bantering and they're thinking over everything a little bit more closely because the matches are single elimination. And consequently, that is something that you need to pay attention to. But that's about it for running a Top Cut. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat before we move on to tournament rules for large event structure. Top Cuts are a lot of fun. They are a different part of the experience, and one that I encourage people to stick around for if you get the opportunity at a larger event. Ask the head judge, hey, can I take part in the top 8? Frequently the answer will be like, unfortunately, I already have 17 volunteers and I don't need twice as many judges as players. However, sometimes they'll be like, yes, I was looking for volunteers. Everybody else has a long drive home tonight, so I was just going to let them go home. Would love to have you for top 8. But let's talk about large event structure. This is going to be the first of, I think, 3, possibly 2 lessons on large event structure. We're going to have tournament roles, we're going to have escalation procedures, and we're going to have tasks, the various teams that can happen. This time we're just going to be going over the various roles, starting with the tournament organizer. The tournament organizer is at the top of the hierarchy. The way we use tournament organizer is different than how some other communities use tournament organizer. A lot of, I think, wargaming and miniatures communities use tournament organizer to mean something that's a little bit more synonymous with judge who is managing the event, as opposed to the store owner, the person who is running the venue. The way we and FFG are using tournament organizer for Star Wars Unlimited is the person running the venue. This is the person who sets the event schedule, manages pricing, hires staff, owns or rents the venue. This can overlap with the judge staff, but very frequently does not. The tournament organizer also deals with player concerns and can remove players from the venue. It's for larger events, destination events, it's not uncommon for the tournament organizer to have multiple representatives. For the sector qualifiers run by OPE, they had somebody who was assigned to prize wall the entire time, somebody who was assigned to coverage, somebody who is assigned, I think, to a vendor booth. They had somebody on stage to assist the scorekeepers, and then I think they had 1 or 2 additional people on site to pull product from the truck, help out wherever it's needed, cover breaks, manage that team of 5 or 6 people. The tournament organizer team can be relatively large, and they'll have their own internal hierarchy. However, most of the time at a larger event, something outside of a planetary qualifier, most judges are not going to need to interact with the tournament organizer a lot, other than an initial briefing and getting comped out at the end. Usually they go through the hierarchy of speaking to their team leader, head judge, who then speaks to the tournament organizer if necessary. The most frequent reason for you to go directly to a tournament organizer is a player comes up to you and is like, I would like to complain specifically to a tournament organizer. TOs can issue refunds, can move players from one event to another. They're able to do things that judges simply aren't able to do because you don't get to control the purse strings of the tournament organizer. Mad Dog Max asks, are the new judge promos behind the blue curtain? No, the new judge promos are downstairs in a box that I know the location of, and I'm not going to tell you. But, alright, floor rolls. So, after the tournament organizer, I'm going to be breaking roles at large tournaments into 2 broad categories. We have floor roles, which are generally active judging roles where you're going to be answering calls, handling round-to-round logistics, and interacting with players directly. Then there are admin roles, which are generally a little bit more static, and you're not going to be answering as many rules or policy questions, but still having that fundamental knowledge of the game is very important. Gentle Giant 303 says, raid on Jonah's house. You don't want to raid my house. I have a very limited number of promos. I have only a couple % of them. The vast majority are at either Tim's house or Tim's warehouse. So Portland, not Massachusetts. At least that's my recommendation. Yeah, absolutely Tim's house. Much better value proposition there. Now, if you wanted Lego, I have Lego. Tim doesn't have Lego. Please don't steal my toys. All right, floor judge roles. So we've all, hopefully at this point, heard of head judges. The head judge is the final authority for the event that they're on. For many multi-tournament weekends, each event has its own head judge. The head judge is responsible for developing a staff schedule for their event if they have many judges, and some other pre-event work. They're the one who handles the morning briefing for their team. They handle appeals and cheating investigations and other major incidents. They're also going to communicate directly with the TO about their needs and delegate tasks to the team leads and lead the assistant head judge team. I'm going to answer some questions that are nonsense before we continue. Mad Dog Max asks, who has more Metal Initiative tokens? I have 1, and I think Tim has 0, so I think I win that. Dragon Jack and Loku667 both ask about Death Star. I have the Death Star too. I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to put it. Mad Dog Max asks if the Falcon made the trip safely. It did. I'm trying to figure out again where it's going. I think I know where I'm putting it, but I need to make sure I have the ceiling space. And hopefully, at some point I'm going to show it all off because I'm going to be very proud of it, but that's going to be some time from now. Alrighty. So, we have the head judge. We also have assistant head judges. These are sometimes known as support judges, appeals judges. There are a variety of names for the role. Their job is to ease the burden on the head judge for things that only the head judge can do. This is primarily appeals and investigations. They're not expected to take part in the pre-event work. Appeals judging is one of my favorite roles because you have all of the authority and none of the responsibility. So people just come up to you and they're like, hey, I have a super interesting, very complicated question and it's live. Let's go handle that. That's just so much fun. I love it. You're generally not going to see that at the local level. You're not going to see that at planetary qualifiers. You start to see it when there's a need for it, when there's a probability of 2 investigations happening simultaneously. And that happens at around the 400 player mark for some TCGs. I think for Star Wars, it's probably closer to the 500 player mark. And then adding more players means you add more assistant head judges. Sectors and regionals each had, at least the ones that I attended, the sectors in Europe had myself and 1 assistant head judge. In the US, it was myself and 2 assistant head judges. Galactics is going to have a team of 4 assistant head judges, so the head judge team will be 5 members. There's some variance in that, depending on the experience level of the head judges, the expected size and intensity of the event. If you had, for example, have a more intense event but smaller event, you may have more head judges. It's very likely that on Sunday of the Galactic Championship, which will have, I believe, I haven't done the math, but it's around 64 players, maybe 100. That's going to have 3 head judges, and 3 head judges for 100 players is certainly excessive, but we also want to make sure that every player is getting the best possible response and throwing a bunch of extra hands at that. So Mad Dog Max asks, is each head judge, assistant head judge going to have their own team? So the way I structure assistant head judges is I don't give them teams. If you're leading a team, and we'll get to leads in a moment, you have tasks that you need to manage and judges that you need to manage, and being in charge of those tasks and directly managing them and directly managing those people means that you're no longer able to handle your high priority tasks. For example, if your job is to manage deck checks, but right before deck checks get started or during the middle of them, you get pulled into an appeal or an investigation, you're not going to be able to manage your team anymore. And so it is difficult, I find, to be effective as both an assistant head judge and a team lead. There is some amount of, as an assistant head judge or as a head judge, you're going to oversee these teams, but those teams have their own team leads that are managing them directly, just so not everybody's reporting to the head judge, just to delegate that a little bit more. But that can be a little bit flexible. Speaking of team leads are usually roles assigned by the head judge for internal use at the event. They are assigned a task to manage and a team of judges to lead. These tasks can include posting pairings, managing deck checks, handling end of round, being in charge of the coverage area, covering for breaks for other teams when they go on breaks. Those are, I think, the primary. Handling product distribution at the beginning of the day, particularly for limited events, is often a team of itself that then transitions to being a floor team. There is also just floor teams where it's just our job for the day is make sure floor coverage is good. And it's not just answer calls, it is move people around physically in the space to make sure that there are enough judges in every area of the room and be cognizant of that so that other teams can focus on their tasks, and then somebody be like, hey, there are no judges over there, go over there. And you're like, okay, I can do that. Team leads usually have, a large team would be like 6 or 7 judges. It's usually closer to 3 or 4. At smaller events, you might have 2 team members and a team lead. Maybe even 1. But team leads are also often not, in addition to being leaders at events, they are often more experienced judges, and so they are people that we generally just say, hey, if you need to consult on these more complicated things, find a head judge or a team lead, because it is simple. It is a nice way to consolidate, just being like, these people are tournament experts, go to them for these things. Team leads mentor and guide their team, and it's not just task completion. As we talked about in lesson 22 on leadership, part of your job as a team lead is to make sure that your team grows and enjoys their weekend. So communicating with the floor judges on their team extensively, but also you want to check in with the other team leads to see if there's anything you can do to help with their tasks. There's a lot of communication, for example, between deck checks issuing massive time extensions and end of round trying to get rid of those time extensions. So like how those time extensions are communicated, how they're highlighted or flagged, that's usually a conversation those 2 team leads have in the beginning of the day. End of round and floor also often talk, because end of round is like, hey, during the end of round, we are noticing these areas don't have a ton of judges to help us with finding outstanding matches. Can you make sure that people are over there? And again, constant communication. Sometimes there's communication between the coverage team and these various teams. Like, I know that you want to check table 2 for a deck check. They're probably going to be a feature match. Talk to us and we can hold that match on mulligans and just say it's for coverage purposes, so that you can swoop in and get deck checks without them drawing opening hands or something along those lines. And so as a team lead, my recommendation, I think I included this in leadership, but my recommendation if you're in a team lead role is talk to every team lead and every head judge once every round. You're not going to be able to do it because if you do that, you'll not do your task at all and not mentor your team at all. But if you aim for that, you'll hit a reasonable amount, which is talking to every team lead every other round and every head judge every 3 or 4 rounds. It's also just, I cannot overstress how important it is as a team lead to make the experience of your team a good one. A lot of team leads are very task focused, and we talked about this in the leadership lesson of the first time you're in a leadership role, the thing that you can measure, the thing where you can see success and failure is the task, and so you focus on that because it's objective, it's easy to grasp, it's something you have a handle on. And then you your team suffers a little bit. Similar to team leads are task points or a point person. This is somebody who's in charge of managing a task like a team lead, but doesn't have a team. So it's like, hey, we have a 128-player planetary qualifier. I have a team of myself and 2 other judges for the entire staff. If I'm like, okay, Mad Dog Max, you're in charge of deck checks, and myself and Gentle Giant are on your team, then I'm like, okay, who runs end of round? Nobody. So I'd be like, Mad Dog Max, you're in charge of deck checks. Gentle Giant, you're in charge of end of round. If you need somebody to help you with your tasks, grab somebody else who's available at the time. A point person's job is to ensure that their task is completed, not necessarily to do it themselves. At these smaller events, other judges generally have tasks, so it is frequently do it yourself. But delegating it or recruiting assistance from somebody that they pick is incredibly valuable. Task point roles and being the point person is often a stepping stone to team leading because it requires the responsibility to manage a task without the responsibility of managing a team as well. So it can be a little bit more straightforward. It can also be a little bit harder because you have to do everything yourself. It requires a little bit more expertise in some ways. There are also side event leads. Side events at larger turns can involve a complex schedule and many judges. Choreographing that and managing that generally falls to an expert. Sometimes that lead is a tournament organizer. Sometimes it is a judge. Sometimes the leadership role is broken down into various categories. You have your scheduled sides lead. You have your on-demand lead. You have your competitive sides lead. Sometimes you might have something like the Twin Suns lead or a limited lead, depending on what events you have. Sides leading is very different, as Gentle Giant says, than any other team leading because it is just it's pure logistics. At a certain size, you're not able to lead from the front. You're not able to run events yourself because you need to be managing the other events you have. I've seen event weekends that have as many as 30 scheduled events on a day and will run dozens, if not hundreds, of on-demand pods, and juggling all of those and being aware of all those. That's your job. Knowing where everything is and what is happening with it is your responsibility. And so if you're like, I'm going to go spend a half hour making sure that this premiere event is running smoothly to cover somebody's break, you will lose track of all of your events and be failing at your job. It's also a lot harder to do direct mentorship on sides leading jobs when they start to scale up. When you have 1 or 2 judges on your sides team, you can mentor them like you would if you had 1 or 2 members on your team on a large competitive event. However, at a certain point, you're like, okay, I have 5 judges. I have one of them over there running on-demand drafts, Premiere pods, and Twin Suns pods. I have 2 people over there running all of our Premiere for the day. That person is running Sealed in another portion of the room, and that person is running our competitive rebound event over there in yet another portion of the room. And your team's never going to come together. You're not going to have team moments. You can't send your entire team on break at once because then your events would crash and burn. And so it can be a very disjointed experience, and mentorship is very challenging in a sides lead role. It's also very fun if you enjoy logistics. If you don't enjoy logistics, it is a nightmare. Sides lead is something that I would recommend to somebody who's interested in becoming a head judge or an assistant head judge. My recommendation, and then I'm going to talk about floor judges real quick. Floor judges, the everyone else, but floor judges are the most fundamental part of the structure. You can live without leads. You can live without point people. You can live without assistant head judges. You need floor judges. You need people to take calls and complete tasks. If you don't have that, your event will fail. Floor judges are far and away the most important people for making the event happen. Even if they don't have as much freedom to do whatever they think is right. They're generally lowest on the hierarchy. Generally, in my experience, you're going to be assigned to one role for the entire day. So if you're assigned to the Galactic Championship, you're on the Galactic Championship all day. If you're assigned to on-demands, you're on on-demands all day. If you're assigned to scheduled sides, you're on scheduled sides all day. If it's a multi-day event, however, you might go day 1 Galactic Championships, day 2 on-demands, day 3 scheduled side events. So there's always going to be some amount of flexibility. Mad Dog Max says, I assumed we would kick off to sides as the field shrinks. Sometimes you do that. However, frequently by the time the larger event has shrunk to the size. So here's what happens. You show up, you start your day, event's the largest it's going to be. Then the event begins to shrink, but it's shrinking right as you're doing your full round breaks. Then you have to do half round breaks, and your judge staff is again smaller than normal, and so the judge staff naturally shrinks. Then you get towards the end of your shift, and you have everybody's back from break. We have a round and a half to go. However, you've also been here the entire day. You've been here for 8, 9, 10 hours already. Sending you over to sides just means you have a longer shift. And so in my experience, folks generally aren't shuffled from one area to another unless there's a dramatic need for bodies. The exception to this is on Sundays. Furthermore, moving people from one place to another, especially if it's not pre-scheduled, can be very disruptive to tournament logistics. If somebody has a plan using everybody for how they do deck checks or end of round, and then they lose half of those people, sometimes losing people can be very disruptive to that, and keeping consistency throughout the event means that the event continues as normal. Also, strangely, sometimes getting an influx of people can be damaging to your logistics. If you're like, okay, I have a plan on how we're going to get 15 events handled with 5 judges, and then 10 judges show up and say, we're here to help, and you're like, cool, I have everybody I need. Your plan goes out the window, and you just start throwing judges like darts at a dartboard, and then something breaks and you no longer have a plan and you can't fix it because you're off the rails. And so I've definitely been in a situation where I've gotten reinforcements, added them in, but not appropriately planned for them. The exception to not moving around is on Sunday. Sunday you can expect to move around. It's a shorter day for the main event. Galactic Championship is going to be 3 rounds before we cut down to top 8. And at that point, having more than 4 judges on it is excessive. And we're going to have more than 4 judges at the beginning of the day. And then as things begin to wind down, they wind down earlier. You might be asked to do some light teardown tasks like taking table numbers, so it might bump around a little bit. Mad Dog Max asks, is my car horn going off? Not mine, somebody else's. I'm no longer in a basement, and so now I have sound and noise pollution coming in here. You might hear a dog or a kid screaming from outside. I could control that by closing the windows, but then I would get very uncomfortable in here. Mad Dog Max also asks, do we have side events for Galactics like the promo event we had in Richmond where we may expect hundreds of players? I believe there are a number of side events scheduled, some of which do expect significant numbers of players. Those are all available on the Galactics website with that schedule. So, the general hierarchy and progression is floor judges report to team leads report to head judges, head judge reports to the tournament organizer. As for progression, the path that I often see is you show up to your first event and you are a floor judge on side events. This is because it is at casual tier, and so there's a little bit more freedom to be inexperienced and to be learning. Players are less likely to get upset if your bad ruling or your lack of experience costs them a pack or 2 instead of making day 2. So you start as floor judge on sides, then you're a floor judge on competitive events, then you're a point person on small competitive events, then you are a team lead on mid-sized competitive events, then on large competitive events, then a sides lead at these weekends, then it's assistant head judge, then it's head judge, and then you start to get into other roles, and it's kind of a choose your own adventure at that point because you know everything. In addition to floor roles, there are a lot of admin roles. Admin roles are as important as floor roles. They have practically no judge calls, so you don't really need to know rules or policy. But admin roles require a high degree of trust because you are given a lot of power over the event. Information desk is a pretty good starting point, or customer service. That is essentially just being able to point to the signs that players don't read, like, hey, where's the scorekeeper? Where's Lost and Found? Where do I redeem my prize ticks? How can I register for an event? Where's my event? Information desk, customer service, that's the type of question you answer. Very frequently, everybody in an admin role has this. Frequently because the admin team is clustered together at a stage, whether it be a literal raise stage or just people grouped together. You can be like, I don't know that, let me ask somebody, and you just ask the person next to you rather than having to go and find somebody. Scorekeepers are relatively stationary. They're generally tied to whatever scorekeeping computer is. Frequently these days, with strong scorekeeping tools, a scorekeeper can handle multiple events. So they might be handling your main event at a large tournament as well as the secondary event and scheduled sides. You might have a couple scorekeepers, one running scheduled sides, one running large competitive events, one running on-demands or something along those lines. But their job is to just make sure rounds turn over in a timely manner and that any issues that crop up are addressed. Registration, they register players. This is a relatively high trust role because players will be handing you money. Very frequently, it'll be using credit cards. However, very frequently, it will also be cash. And the tournament organizer is trusting you to hold hundreds of dollars of their money. And that can be that is not a role that they hire into and just be like, we've never worked with you before. Please hold hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. We trust you. We don't know who you are. Prize wall is another task. Rather than getting booster packs as raw prizes, you get tickets, which you can spend at a prize wall, redeem those tickets. It's very much like arcade tickets. So that you can be a little bit more choosy with your prizes. However, prize wall is a high energy role because you're going to be generally interfacing with players, explaining the same things a lot. It's also a role that has waves of busyness and doing nothingness. Friday, you're going to do nothing, but you need to be there because somebody might be there for just Friday and might be wanting to redeem their tickets. Same with Saturday. Friday's going to be relatively slow. Saturday's going to be a little bit more because a lot more people are just there for just Saturday. And then Sunday is going to be far and away your busiest day because tickets are usually good for the entire show. So if you have a 2, 3, or 4 day show, they may have been collecting tickets over time. And then when the final event is done or they're like, hall is closing, everybody needs to be out of here in an hour, people are like, okay, time to spend my tickets. And everybody else has the same idea and you are just slammed. These roles, infodesk, scorekeeping, registration, and prize wall, you are very frequently an NPC. You just repeat the same information over and over again. You get asked the same questions over and over again. And it can be very draining. Just because people don't treat you like a person, they treat you like an information booth. Or get frustrated when the schedule doesn't work for them or they're not happy with the prizes. And so taking care of yourself is very important. The last admin role is back of house. This is a little bit different from other admin roles, as it is a very independent role. It's essentially a fix-it person. A big part of the job is bringing product from back of house or wherever it is being stored, booster packs and that sort of thing, to wherever drafts or sealed play is happening, making sure that exactly enough goes out. If there are promos that need to be distributed or other goodies like playmats, drawstring totes, sleeves, deck boxes, initiative tokens, they're the ones who make sure that that is ready. They might be the one who prepares kits so you might, if you have a bag, they might throw all the things that are necessary into the bag so that judges only have to hand out one thing as opposed to 7 different things. Again, this is a very independent role, and it's usually held by somebody who's a long-time tournament expert or a representative of the TO for 2 reasons. One, they have access to a huge amount of value. They have the keys to the vault, essentially. They have access to all of the product and all of the promos, and they're the ones that are accounting for it, and they're the ones who say this many went out, this many came back, nothing was lost. And they need to understand the flow of the event. They need to know when stuff is going to need to be in certain places and can account for that and plan for that. On top of that, they frequently are just fixers, like, oh, there's a spill, I know who to contact for that. Oh, a table number's missing, let me get you a replacement. Oh, a pairings board broke, let me fix it or find you a replacement. They just solve problems that judges who aren't as familiar with the tournament organizer know. I'm about to wrap up. I have just 1 or 2 more points to hit, so if you have any last-minute questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. But a lot of these admin roles are held or can be held by the tournament organizer. At your local store level, almost certainly it's going to be managed by your tournament organizer. At larger events, it begins to get distributed a little bit, and if this sort of thing interests you, if you're like, I do really enjoy helping out with the game, I enjoy helping people learn the game, but I cannot explain rules or policy for my life, or I don't enjoy doing that, or it's difficult for me to be on my feet all day, or you just enjoy doing the admin registration, scorekeeping work more, it's perfectly valid and something that you can get to as a judge. A lot of tournament organizers hire externally for this because they need 5 or 6 or 10 people for the weekend, but they don't have jobs for those people the rest of the time. Mad Dog Max asks, any idea when we get our starting roles for Galactics around the time of the event? My hope is to have a general schedule of you're assigned to Galactics this day, side events this day, open this day, on demands this day, early to mid next week, and then at least 2 weeks in advance have specific role assignments for folks. So if you're on the Galactics, at least you're on end of round, you're on deck checks, you're on floor team, you're on logistics, you're on coverage, whatever it happens to be. These are your teammates. Here's who you're going to be working with. But unless anybody has any last minute questions, that's all I have for now. As always, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Good luck and have fun.